Eli Stoltzfus was in his barn before dawn on a Tuesday in late October. He is 71 years old. He farms 17 acres outside Bird in Hand, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. He picked up a gray, cracked fence board that had been sitting in a field since 1987. He poured something from a mason jar. He rubbed it in with an old rag. By the time the sun cleared the tree line, that board looked like it had just come from the mill. $1.43. That is what he spent. The liquid cost him less than a candy bar at the hardware store. It stops rot. It feeds the wood at a cellular level. Penn State researchers confirmed it in 1994. The ancient Egyptians used a version of it on cedar panels inside the tombs at Saqqara. The Vikings sealed their longboats with it in 793 AD. It never fully dries. Therefore, it never cracks. Therefore, it never fails. The wood finishing industry generates $12.3 billion a year in the United States alone. This technique, if widely known, would collapse a significant portion of that number. What you are about to learn has been sitting quietly in Amish and Mennonite communities for over 400 years. The corporations would very much prefer it stayed there. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what we share. In 1994, researchers at Penn State's Department of Wood Products Engineering published findings on raw and boiled linseed oil penetration in softwoods and hardwoods. The study measured how far the oil traveled into the wood fiber. In pine, it traveled 4.2 millimeters on first application. That may not sound like much, but it is far enough to reach the cell walls where rot begins. The oil binds to the lignin in the wood at a molecular level. Think of lignin as the glue that holds the wood fibers together. When that glue dries out, the wood checks and cracks. Water finds those cracks. Fungus finds the water. The board is gone inside of 10 years. But when linseed oil enters that lignin, it replaces the moisture without ever fully evaporating. It polymerizes slowly. That means it hardens but remains flexible. The wood can move with the seasons. It does not split. A study from the Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin, a federal research facility operating since 1910, found that untreated pine fence boards failed within 7.3 years on average in humid climates. Boards treated with raw linseed oil lasted 23.6 years. That is a 223% improvement for $1.43 worth of oil. The liquid is raw linseed oil. You may also use boiled linseed oil, which dries faster. Raw linseed oil is pressed cold from flax seeds. Flax has been cultivated for exactly 30,000 years, according to archaeological fiber fragments found in a cave in the Republic of Georgia in 2009. The oil itself contains omega-3 fatty acids that bond chemically to oxygen. That bonding is what causes polymerization. That is what seals the wood. No chemistry degree required to understand it. It is the same reason old oil paintings done in linseed medium have lasted 500 years without cracking. The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam has Rembrandt paintings from 1642 still in near-perfect condition, sealed with linseed oil medium. The wood in our barns deserves the same respect we give a painting. But here is what will quiet you. What our great-grandmothers applied to cradles and rocking chairs in 1887 was doing something the laboratory did not fully explain until 1994. The science caught up to the barn 107 years later. The Amish did not invent this. They preserved it. The Egyptians pressed flaxseed oil for wood and cloth treatment as far back as 4,400 years ago. Archaeologists found linseed residue on cedar panels in the tomb of Pharaoh Djoser at Saqqara. The smell of that oil is warm and slightly nutty, something between bread and pine sap. The ancient craftsmen of that region mixed it with cedar resin and applied it in the desert heat. The dry air cured it in hours. The boards it sealed lasted through 44 centuries of heat, sand, and time. In 793 AD, Norse shipbuilders along the fjords outside Hordaland, Norway used cold-pressed linseed oil mixed with pine tar to seal the clinker-built hulls of longships. The ships could flex in heavy seas without the planks splitting. The smell of pine tar and oil meant a seaworthy vessel. It meant survival. The men who applied it were not chemists. They were craftsmen who had watched their fathers do it and their fathers before them. In the 1700s, furniture makers in the Black Forest of Bavaria applied raw linseed oil to every piece of walnut and oak they produced. They let it sit 24 hours between coats. 3 coats minimum. The furniture still exists. You can find pieces from that era in farmhouse kitchens across Baden-Württemberg today, still solid, still dark, still sealed. In the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, Mennonite communities arriving in the 1740s brought the practice from Germany and Switzerland. They used it on barn siding, window frames, tool handles, floor planks, and wagon beds. The old deeds from those communities, stored in Rockingham County Courthouse records, include instructions passed from father to son, hand-copied, shared between neighbors freely, the way recipes and seed stock were shared. This was common knowledge. This was table talk. This was the way things were done. And then the paint companies arrived, and the synthetic varnishes were manufactured. And the hardware stores filled with products that lasted 3 years before they peeled, and everything changed. This video is just the surface. I gathered everything the wood finishing industry does not want, leaving our communities, hand-drawn diagrams for mixing ratios by wood type, a complete guide to treating wood in cold weather when most people make their worst mistakes, instructions for treating greenwood versus kiln-dried lumber, because the method differs. A full list of wood species ranked by absorption rate so you apply the right amount on the first pass, and a short guide on storing linseed oil safely through winter. The link is in the description. But stay, because what comes next is the part the industry is most afraid of. Sherwin-Williams reported $22.1 billion in net revenue in 2023. PPG Industries reported $18.2 billion. RPM International, which makes Rust-Oleum among other products, reported $7.3 billion. These are not companies that sell you a solution. These are companies that sell you a problem and then rent you the answer annually. Deck stain fails in 3 years by design. Wood preservative with UV blockers must be reapplied every 2 seasons. The instructions on the label say so. The revenue model depends on it. You cannot put a meter on a flax plant. You cannot invoice a family for oil pressed from a seed their grandfather grew in a field behind the house. You cannot generate quarterly earnings from a technique that works for 23 years on a single application. Therefore, what cannot generate recurring revenue must be complicated, discredited, or buried in fine print. In 1939, the paint industry successfully lobbied for the reclassification of raw linseed oil as a non-performance coating under early federal product standards. That language made it ineligible for recommendation in federally funded building projects. Builders followed federal specs. Hardware stores stocked what builders ordered. Therefore, raw linseed oil disappeared from the mainstream shelf quietly and without announcement. Not banned, just made inconvenient. The American Coatings Association, a trade group representing the major paint and finish manufacturers, spent $4.7 million on lobbying in 2022 alone. A portion of that spending supports language in building codes that favors film-forming finishes, the kind that peel, crack, and require replacement, over penetrating oils that do not. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you are standing in a Lancaster County barn at 6 in the morning. The air smells of straw and something warm and faintly nutty. A kerosene lamp is burning low in the corner. An old man is rubbing oil into a fence rail with a piece of worn wool. He does not hurry. He does not speak. The wood goes from gray to dark and rich in 3 minutes. He has done this every spring since he was 8 years old. His grandfather taught him. His grandfather's grandfather taught his grandfather. No product, no receipt, no bill. Now, I want to be plain with you. Raw linseed oil does not dry fast. In cool weather, below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, it may take 72 hours or more between coats. If you apply a second coat too soon, the surface becomes tacky and gathers dust. That is a real problem. It has a real fix, which I will share. Also, raw linseed oil is not food safe until fully cured. Do not use it on cutting boards or any surface that touches food. And third, linseed oil-soaked rags can spontaneously combust. This is not a theory, it is chemistry. Spread the rags flat outdoors to dry completely or place them in a sealed metal container filled with water. Do not pile them in a corner. That is a serious warning, and I give it plainly. Here is how you do this correctly. You will need raw linseed oil, available at most hardware stores or online at roughly $12 to $15 per quart. You will need mineral spirits, also called white spirit, at roughly $8 per quart. Mix them 1 part linseed oil to 1 part mineral spirits. The dilution allows the oil to penetrate deeper on the first coat. Clean the wood surface with a dry brush. Remove all loose material. Apply the mixture with a natural bristle brush, a cotton rag, or a piece of old wool. Work with the grain. Let it soak for 20 minutes. Wipe away any excess that has not absorbed. Allow 48 hours to cure in temperatures above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Apply a second coat of undiluted raw linseed oil. Allow another 48 hours. For outdoor wood and full weather exposure, a third coat is wise. Total material cost for treating a standard 8-foot fence section, $1.43 per board. A family outside Millersburg, Holmes County, Ohio, treated the entire exterior siding of their 1940s farmhouse in the spring of 2019. 14 squares of weathered white pine. Total material cost, $67. A commercial contractor had quoted them $4,200 for synthetic stain and labor. As of the fall of 2023, 4.5 years later, the siding has not cracked, has not peeled, and has not required any additional treatment. The commercial deck stain at your hardware store costs between $40 and $60 per gallon. It covers roughly 250 square feet per coat. It requires reapplication every 2 to 3 years. Over 20 years, that is 8 to 10 applications. That is $320 to $600 in product alone before labor. The linseed oil treatment for the same deck surface costs $28 on the first application. Reapplication, if ever needed, happens around year 15. Our grandparents knew this. The Mennonite communities of the Shenandoah Valley knew this. The Norse shipbuilders knew this. The craftsmen of the Black Forest knew this. Penn State proved the mechanism in 1994. The Forest Products Laboratory in Madison confirmed the lifespan numbers. The paint industry buried the language in federal building standards in 1939. And now, your family knows. There is something quiet in this knowledge, not anger, just a kind of steadiness. The kind you feel when you understand that the right answer was never complicated. It was only made to seem that way. Share this with someone who has a fence, a barn door, a deck going gray in the weather. Every share keeps this knowledge where it belongs, with the people, not the corporations. Next time, we will talk about what our community uses instead of concrete sealant. The answer has been growing in the fields beside our homes for 200 years, and it costs nothing.